The forest goes quiet long before anyone falls asleep. The fire crackles softly, throwing flickering light across rough stone walls. Beyond that tiny circle of warmth lies complete darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Branches snap. Something is moving. But inside the camp, no one panics. No one runs. Instead, they wait. That's the strange part. For most animals, night is the most dangerous time to be alive. Vision fades. Predators take control. Every shadow could hide a threat. You'd expect ancient humans to spend every sunset trembling in fear, desperate for the first light of morning, but the evidence tells a very different story. Archaeologists keep finding ancient campfires that burned long after sunset. Deep inside caves, they discovered paintings that could only have been created by firelight. Stone tools were repaired at night. Food was prepared. Stories were shared. Some people even traveled beneath the moon. Think about that for a second. If darkness meant danger, why were our ancestors choosing to stay awake? What was so important that it couldn't wait until daylight? The more researchers uncovered, the stranger the mystery became. Night wasn't simply the end of the day. Somehow, it became the beginning of something else. Something that no other species on Earth had ever turned into an advantage. And that raises an even bigger question. When the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, what were ancient humans really doing, and could the answer explain how our species changed the course of history? The simplest answer seems almost too obvious. They stayed awake because of the fire. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire transformed the night from a place of fear into a place of safety. Its light pushed back the darkness, its heat kept freezing temperatures at bay, and its smoke discouraged many curious predators from getting too close. Even today, wild animals often hesitate before approaching an active campfire. Picture an ancient campsite after sunset. Children huddle close to the flames. Hunters sharpen stone spear points worn down during the day. Someone slowly roasts meat over glowing embers while others feed dry branches into the fire, making sure it never dies. The crackling flames become a protective wall that no cave or tree could ever provide. Archaeological discoveries support this picture. Ancient hearths have been uncovered across Africa, Europe, and Asia, many containing layers of ash that suggest fires were carefully maintained for hours. Burned bones, stone tools, and food remain scattered around these hearths, hint that people continued working long after daylight had disappeared. At first glance, the mystery seems solved. Night wasn't conquered by strength, it was conquered by fire. But then researchers noticed something strange. Many activities taking place after sunset had nothing to do with staying warm or keeping predators away. Some cave paintings were created deep underground, far beyond the reach of natural light. Decorative objects were crafted by flickering flames. Complex tools were shaped with remarkable patience, even though daylight would have made the work much easier. Think about that. If survival was the only goal, why spend precious nighttime energy creating art, crafting objects, and gathering for hours after darkness fell? Suddenly, the fire no longer looked like the answer. It looked like the beginning of a much bigger mystery. For a long time, researchers believed the extra hours around the fire were simply idle time. The hunting was over. The gathering was finished. Darkness made travel dangerous, so people stayed where they were until sunrise. It sounded logical. After all, what else could they possibly do in the middle of the night? But then a different picture began to emerge. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities noticed something fascinating. As the sun went down, daily routines changed completely. Conversations grew longer. Elders began telling stories. Children listened in silence. Hunters replayed the day's successes and failures. Plans for tomorrow slowly took shape beneath the glow of the fire. That might not sound extraordinary until researchers compared these nighttime conversations with those held during the day. Daylight was filled with constant interruptions. People searched for food, repaired tools, watched for danger, and cared for their families. There was little time for long discussions. But night created something that daylight rarely could: undivided attention. For the first time all day, everyone was gathered in one place, focused on the same voices, the same stories, and the same ideas. Think about what that really means. Knowledge that once disappeared with a single person could now be passed to an entire group. Survival tricks became traditions. Memories became history. Warnings became legends. A child's lesson today could protect their own children decades later. It almost sounds as if the campfire had become the world's very first classroom. But one question refused to disappear. If storytelling and teaching were the real purpose of those long evenings, why don't our closest relatives do the same? Chimpanzees live in social groups. Wolves hunt together. Elephants pass knowledge through generations. Yet none of them transformed the night into what humans did. So perhaps the greatest change wasn't the fire itself. Perhaps it was something the fire awakened inside the human mind. And that mystery was only beginning to unfold. One question kept returning. If ancient nights were filled with stories, learning, and quiet activity, could there be any physical evidence left behind thousands of years later? For a long time, that seemed impossible. Words vanish. Conversations leave no fossils. Laughter disappears into the air. But researchers realized they didn't need to find the stories themselves. They only needed to find where the stories happened. So the investigation turned toward one of humanity's oldest inventions, the hearth. Archaeologists began carefully excavating ancient campsites across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Instead of focusing only on stone tools or animal bones, they mapped every object surrounding ancient fire pits. Piece by piece, a forgotten pattern started to appear. The oldest hearths weren't surrounded by random debris. They were surrounded by people. Broken spear points lay beside carefully shaped blades. Burned seeds mixed with food remains. Decorative shells, pigments, and unfinished carvings appeared within the same circle of firelight. Everything seemed to flow toward the flames, as if the campfire wasn't just providing warmth, it was organizing human life itself. That was unexpected. Researchers had assumed the hearth was little more than a survival tool. Instead, it appeared to function like the center of an entire social world. It became the place where meals were shared, tools were repaired, ideas were exchanged, and experience passed from one generation to the next. Think about that. The most important discovery wasn't hidden inside a cave wall or buried beneath ancient bones. It was hidden in the space between them. But that discovery raised an even deeper mystery. If the campfire pulled people together night after night, what invisible force kept them there long after the practical work was finished? Whatever the answer was, it wasn't made of stone, wood, or fire. It existed inside the human mind, and uncovering it would change the entire story. Now, imagine one night, nearly 40,000 years ago, a young boy sits at the edge of a fire, clutching a freshly carved spear that is still too large for his hands. Tomorrow will be his first real hunt. Around him, the adults aren't asleep. They watch the flames dance across the darkness while the oldest woman in the group begins to speak. She doesn't tell them where to find berries. She doesn't explain how to sharpen a stone blade. Instead, she tells the story of a hunter who ignored the warning cries of birds and walked straight into the path of a cave lion. Every child around the fire listens without moving. Every adult already knows the ending. Yet they listen too, because this isn't entertainment, it's memory disguised as a story. Long before books existed, this was how knowledge survived. The tale carried lessons no list of instructions ever could. It taught patience, it rewarded caution. It reminded everyone that pride could be just as dangerous as any predator waiting beyond the firelight. Anthropologists studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies have noticed that evening stories often contain practical survival lessons hidden inside memorable narratives. The details change from culture to culture, but the pattern appears again and again. The stories are emotional because emotion makes information harder to forget. Picture that young boy staring into the flames. By sunrise, he won't just remember a warning. He'll remember the hunter, the lion, the fear, and the consequence. Years later, when he hears birds suddenly fall silent in the forest, that story may return before he even realizes it. And in that single moment, a tale told beside a campfire could save his life. But if stories became humanity's greatest survival tool, another mystery appears. Why did our brains become so perfectly suited to remember them after dark? At this point, it would be easy to think this story belongs only to a few prehistoric tribes gathered around isolated campfires. It doesn't. The same pattern begins appearing almost everywhere humans go. Picture an Ice Age camp in Europe. Then imagine a small hunting band crossing the Australian outback thousands of years later. Travel north to the frozen Arctic, where families huddle inside shelters while icy winds rage outside. Cross the ocean to the early Americas, where fires glow beneath unfamiliar stars, different landscapes, different languages, different cultures. Yet when darkness falls, something remarkably similar happens. People gather, they talk, they remember, they prepare. Anthropologists notice this pattern again and again while studying traditional hunter-gatherer societies across the world. Daylight is devoted to survival. Night becomes devoted to something less visible, but no less essential. It is when stories are shared, disagreements are settled, children learn, and tomorrow quietly begins taking shape. And then researchers looked beyond humans. Wolves cooperate in packs. Elephants pass knowledge through generations. Chimpanzees form complex social groups with surprisingly rich relationships. But as sunset arrives, almost every species follows the same rule: adaptation slows. Communication fades. The night becomes a time to endure until morning. Humans broke that rule. Instead of allowing darkness to shorten their lives, they stretched their social world deep into the night. They turned hours that nature had seemingly written off into some of the most valuable hours of the day. Think about how extraordinary that really is. The greatest advantage our ancestors gained may not have been stronger muscles, sharper weapons, or faster legs. It may have been the simple decision to stay together after sunset. But that raises one final puzzle before everything comes together. If every human culture discovered this hidden power of the night, what exactly was happening around those fires that transformed our species in a way no other animal has ever matched? The answer reaches far beyond survival, and it changes the meaning of darkness itself. But every great pattern has its exceptions, and those exceptions forced researchers to ask even harder questions. Not every ancient community spent every night gathered peacefully around a campfire. In some environments, the rules changed completely. Imagine living above the Arctic Circle, where summer nights barely exist. The sun lingers on the horizon for hours, blurring the line between day and night. Hunting, traveling, and working often continued long after what should have been sunset. There was no dependable darkness to organize life in the same way. Now picture the opposite extreme: deep inside predator-rich forests. Some groups couldn't afford loud conversations or large fires. A bright flame could reveal their location just as easily as it scared away danger. In those places, silence became its own survival strategy. There were other exceptions too. Evidence suggests that some hunter-gatherers occasionally hunted beneath a full moon, taking advantage of the extra light to track animals across open landscapes. Others divided their sleep into two shorter periods, waking in the middle of the night to tend the fire, keep watch, or quietly interact before returning to rest. At first, these examples seem to break the pattern, but they actually reveal something more important. The goal was never simply to follow the same nightly routine. The goal was to adapt. Whether people talked for hours, traveled under moonlight, whispered in darkness, or stayed awake to guard the camp, every choice reflected the same remarkable ability to reshape behavior instead of surrendering to nature. Think about that. Other animals adapted mostly through biology. Humans adapted through culture. And that subtle difference is about to unlock the biggest mystery of all, because the greatest thing ancient humans created after sunset wasn't fire. It was something far more powerful. So what did ancient humans really do at night? They did something no other species had ever mastered. They escaped the present. For millions of years, life on Earth followed the same rhythm. Daylight was for action. Darkness was for survival. Animals reacted to whatever stood in front of them. A sound in the bushes, a predator nearby, food within reach. But somewhere around a prehistoric campfire, that pattern began to break. As the flames flickered and the world beyond the light disappeared, something extraordinary happened inside the human mind. People stopped thinking only about what was. They began thinking about what could be. A hunt that hadn't happened yet, a child who would grow into the tribe's next hunter, a journey beyond the mountains no one had crossed, ancestors who could no longer speak, children who had not even been born. Darkness removed the endless distractions of the day. Around the fire, imagination had room to grow. Stories became more than entertainment. They became simulations, a safe place to rehearse danger before facing it, a way to pass experience without paying the deadly price of making every mistake yourself. Every legend carried a lesson. Every myth protected a memory. Every conversation quietly shaped tomorrow's decisions. Think about that for a second. The greatest survival tool humans ever invented wasn't the spear, it wasn't the bow, it wasn't even fire. It was the ability to share an imagined world with other people. Once an entire group could believe the same story, they could trust strangers, cooperate in larger numbers, preserve knowledge across generations, and build identities that lasted far longer than a single lifetime. That is why the campfire mattered so much. It wasn't just producing light, it was creating a shared mind. And perhaps that's the deepest irony of all. The darkest hours of the day became the brightest hours in human history. Civilization wasn't born because humans conquered the night. It was born because for the first time they learned how to think together within it. And once that happened, the sunrise was never the most important part of the day again. The forest is quiet once again. The fire still crackles against the darkness, just as it did thousands of generations ago. Beyond its glow, unseen eyes may still be watching. A wolf may still be wandering through the trees. The dangers of the night haven't disappeared. But something else is happening inside that circle of light. An elder finishes a story. A child stares into the flames, imagining places they've never seen and people they'll never meet. Someone quietly plans tomorrow's hunt. Another remembers a lesson learned years before. Nothing remarkable seems to be happening, and yet history is being rewritten. The greatest transformation in human evolution didn't always happen on the battlefield, during the hunt, or beneath the blazing sun. Sometimes it happened in the silence after sunset. Perhaps that's why the night has never truly belonged to fear. For humans, darkness became a canvas, a place where memory became tradition, imagination became strategy, and simple conversations became the foundation of cultures that would outlive everyone sitting around that fire. The campfire eventually disappeared, cities replaced camps, electric lights replaced flames. But every evening, when families gather to talk, friends share stories, or parents teach children before bed, they are repeating a ritual that began tens of thousands of years ago. Maybe that's the real answer to our mystery. Ancient humans didn't simply survive the night, they used it to become the kind of species that could imagine a future together. And in many ways, civilization has been burning beside that same fire ever since.